we bring in the 7-time Hall of Famer, the legendary voice of your Calgary Flames, and our dear, dear friend, Peter Maher, joins us this afternoon on Just a Game. Sir, how do we find you today?
Well, I'm very good, Rob, but before we get into any of the discussions that are primary on the agenda these days, I want to congratulate you on receiving the honor from the Calgary Booster Club on behalf of your media work and other work that you've done for so many years over in this community. I want to congratulate you on that. Very, very well deserved, and it should be a great night when you're honored. I think it's later this week that they're having the dinner and all of that sort of thing. So again, congratulations.
I appreciate that, sir. For those who don't know, there is a little history between Peter and I when it comes to introducing ourselves as award winners. It goes all the way back to the 04-05 lockout when the Flames affiliate was in, where was it, Pete? Lowell. Right? And we had the voice of the Lowell Lock Monsters on, but we had to refer to the award-winning voice of we never knew what award it was.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah. You're bringing back memories for sure.
I am. Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. It means a lot, as you know, coming from you. I'm never going to catch your 7 Hall of Fames, but it's
I don't know. You're doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good. You're in a Hall of Fame, Alberta Sports Hall of Fame, and probably more to come.
Maybe.
Anyway, that's not the important issue.
Yeah, the more important stuff. Monday. Let me start with you. Were you surprised on Monday, Pete? Did the news of the day surprise you?
No, it didn't surprise me, Rob. I had been hearing that Brad Treliving had been offered a new contract, and at least a couple of times from what my sources were telling me, and turned them down on both occasions. So that led me not to be surprised when he came out and made the announcement on Monday that they had mutually agreed for him not to return as general manager of the team after 9 years as the GM of the hockey team. So no, it didn't come down as a surprise to me. Now it's going to be, now I have no idea what's going to happen down the road here, but there's certainly a lot of things that have to take place to get the Flames organization back in ship shape, and they have to have everybody has to be on the same road. I mean, they have to have a plan for this team going forward, and everybody from the owners to the president, to the president of hockey operations, to the general manager and others in the front office and the coaching staff, they've all got to be on that same wavelength to have success for this team going forward.
Pete, and I might be skipping a little bit ahead here, but I think we all agree with that. That's rooted in common sense. That makes so much sense. Is it easier said than done?
Yes, it's easier said than done. There's no question about that, because you've got, a lot of people that are involved here that have different ideas, and some of them go in one direction, some go in another direction. But to me, it's very critical that they all get on the same wavelength. I mean, there's always going to be discussion among the type of people that I mentioned there that are involved with the Flames from top to bottom. But they have their input, but they've all got to be on that same wavelength as to what direction they want to go in with this hockey team. Not one guy wanting to go one way and another guy go another way and then somebody else some other direction. They have to get on that same stream, and they can have some meetings behind the scenes where there be people voice their opinions, but at the end of it, they've got to all be on that same wavelength. And I think that's a very important thing that has to be stressed in the Flames offices now, as they go about the process of finding a new general manager and setting up the front office as they wanted going forward with this team.
Pete, you and I have done this version for 20 years on and off. We so rarely ever talk about the role or the input of the owner, in this case, Murray Edwards. Can you give us a little context, a little bit about their commitment and why I've been here for 20 years. I've heard Murray speak once to the media. That's it. Why don't we ever hear from the owners?
Okay, Rob, let's go way back to when the team came here in 1980. At that time, Nelson Scalabini, a businessman from Vancouver, and was the primary owner of the team. He also had some minority owners that were Calgary businessmen. At that point, it did not include Murray Edwards. Scalabini came in. He was the owner major owner for the first year. After that, he sold his shares to the team to the other Calgary people, the Seaman brothers, Harley Hotchkiss, and Norm Green, and a few other people. Right. And they took over the running of the team. And when they took over running of the team, they said, we will not be speaking public. Mm-hmm. We're going to leave that up to our president and CEO to deal with the public. We're going to remain behind the scenes. We're going to support this team. We're going to provide everything that the team needs to go forward. And but let the public actions be handled by other people other than ownership. Now, when Harley was there, Harley Hotchkiss, the late Harley, when he was there, he did go public a few times, but a lot of that was to do with his job as when he eventually became chairman of the board of the National Hockey League, and was basically, right in there with Commissioner Gary Bettman. And he also had some comments when the Flames were in those cash call situations. A lot of people forget that in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, when the team was going through a stretch where there were no playoffs for 7 consecutive years, the Saddle Dome had about 8,000 people going to the games. So that wasn't enough money to operate a hockey team. So the owners had to kick in some money to keep things going, and they were very glad to do that. And of course, at that time, Harley Hotchkiss, rather than sell the team, there were lots of rumors that this team might get sold to people in Dallas, Houston, and some other places. But Harley Hotchkiss made it very clear that going forward, there's going to be a salary cap in the NHL, and we're going to be able to put things, back to a keel where we can operate on a level with everybody else in the league. So, and of course, eventually we did get the salary cap. The Flames then had that great run in 2004 when they came in and went to the Stanley Cup final. And I think I've said it before, Rob, in some interviews we've done, I really believe that 04 run, that 04 run, had that not happened, this team might not be in Calgary today, because they were looking for cash calls going into that season because of the low crowds. That season did not start out very well, the 03-04 campaign. I remember near the 20th or so of November, Flames had a Saturday night game in Edmonton, lost the game, falling into last place in the conference. And I remember flying back from Edmonton on the charter flight with the team, sitting across the aisle from Daryl Sutter, who at the time was the general manager and coach of the team. And when we arrived in Calgary, he leaned over to me and he said, "Be around tomorrow. I'm going to be making a deal, a trade." And that is when he acquired Mika Kiprasov to come in with the team. And from there, everything turned around. The team went on. They had that great run, essentially won the Stanley Cup. They didn't count the goal, but anyway, we'll get into that later another time. But that team went on to the Stanley Cup final. And then the next year, there was no hockey at all. So can you imagine if the Flames had gone 8 straight years, no playoffs, and then no hockey at all in that 9th year, people wouldn't be going back to sell out the Saddle Dome on a nightly basis as they did after that 04 run. So, and also with the ownership of the team, and I should point this out very clearly, is that ever since the NHL has had the salary cap, the Flame ownership has always, other than one season, the Flames always reached the maximum or close to the maximum of the salary cap with regard to bringing in players for this team to make them competitive and contest for a Stanley Cup. There was only one year they didn't do that. That was the year after they traded Jerome McGinley and Jay Bullmeister, 2 guys that were prominent parts of the team at that point in time. And the next year they came in, as you were mentioning there earlier, the rebuild was in. But the next year they had a fair amount of success. And so the following year after that, again, they boosted up the salary cap to the salary cap max for this team. So, and the other thing that Flames ownership have done throughout the entire stage of this after the local owners turn over is that they set up situations where they would fund worthwhile local organizations. They've got millions and millions of dollars that they've contributed to various charities in the Calgary area. So no, they don't speak public, but they leave that up to going back to the the start of this team, when Cliff Fletcher was here, he was both the president and general manager. He spoke on behalf of ownership. After that, coming in was Bill Hay. And then after that, there was you had Ken King come in, and until Ken passed away, John Bean is a guy that's the president and CEO of the team presently. He's more of a quiet guy. He's a fellow that is not used to being in the public eye, and not overly willing to be in the public eye. So, he most of the time passes it on to the general manager to be the guy, to be the spokesman for the team, which we heard from Brad Treliving over the past 9 years or so, or not 9 years, but in the last 3 or 4 years since John has been the president and CEO of this hockey team. And interestingly, going back in history, this is the first time that a general manager has left the Flames and at a situation where the ownership and the other people within management were hoping and figuring he was going to return to that position. All the other guys that were GMs, when they left, they were either let go, or in the case of Cliff Fletcher, he had been GM of the team since 1972, going back to the Atlanta days. He had a very good offer to go be the general manager in Toronto, and so he left for that challenge. So this is very, very unique, the way this has all come down with Brad Treliving this week.
Yeah, and I would almost think, Pete, that it's a little bit unique in hockey too. I mean, Doug Wilson left, but that was because of health reasons and things like that. For a general manager to actually step aside from a job is rare. Pete, I do want to go back just for context purposes, and I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that finds this stuff interesting. When the owners took over after Nelson Skalbania, and they said that they were going to let the president talk, was that a result of, Harold Ballard in Toronto, Peter Potlington up in Edmonton, that there were owners at that time who were very vocal and very much out there? Was that a reaction to what was going on in other markets?
Well, I'm not sure if that was the reaction to that. I have the suspicion that some of that was. I think some of the other part of that was they wanted to leave everything to hockey people to make the commentaries on behalf of ownership of the team. They would stay in the background. Not that they didn't care about what was going on with the team, but they just didn't want to be into the public forefront while they were ownership of the hockey team. They, basically wanted to be quiet owners and, do as best they can to have the team be successful. Because there's no doubt that Nelson Skalbania, with the way he was carrying on, Peter Pocklington, rather, who actually was a friend of Nelson Skalbania, going back a little bit further in time. He was, Pocklington, very, very outspoken as owner in Edmonton. And of course, Harold Ballard in Toronto. I mean, I could talk all day. I had the opportunity of being broadcaster for the Maple Leafs there for 3 years when Harold was the general manager, was the owner of the Maple Leafs. So there's all kinds of stories there that we can told about how bombastic that Harold Ballard was in his time as owner of the Maple Leafs. So I think it's the way it should be, with the way the Flames ownership handles things in the background. But very much concerned about the operation of the team. This is not to say they don't care. It's just that they don't want to be going public, leaving that up to the hockey people.
By the way, everything that you heard about Harold Ballard is true, right, Pete? Like, you don't have to embellish Harold Ballard stories, do you?
No, don't have to embellish those one little bit. So I had being around him as I was. I mean, it was there were all kinds of things that were going on that were outlandish, to say the least. I mean, it brought back the memory of when Bruce Boudreau was unceremoniously let go in Vancouver earlier this season from the coaching job there. It brought back the memories when I was there when Ballard fired Roger Nielsen. And when Roger was coach of the Leafs, they had a game in Montreal on a Thursday night, lost the game. I think it was 3-2 or 4-2. And then afterwards, Ballard goes on the post-game television show with Dick Beddoes. I don't know if you remember him. Anybody remember him? But he used to be on Hockey Night midweek telecasts and Saturdays as well. And he's also a commentator or a columnist for the Globe and Mail. And Ballard tells, this is the announcement that he's firing Roger Nielsen. It was on this post-game thing with Beddoes that Ballard said, Roger Nielsen is fired. And then when we got on the plane, the charter flight back from Montreal to Toronto after the game, Ballard went to Jim Gregory, who was the general manager. He said, well, you go tell Roger he's fired. And so it was on the plane going back that Roger got that word. And to carry on with that, the next day, at that time, I didn't have a regular color commentator on my broadcast on radio in Toronto. And my boss called me the next morning and he said, can you get in touch with Roger Nielsen and ask him if he'd like to be the color commentator for the rest of the season? And so there were about 3 or 4 weeks left in the regular season. So I phoned Roger and he said, sure, I'd like to do that. And but I have to check with the old man. Of course, the old man he was talking about was Ballard. So he anyway, he goes and he calls me back later in that evening. And he says, yeah, it's okay. I'm all set. I'll be there for the game tomorrow night. So I said, okay, I'll meet you at such and such a spot and at such and such a time tomorrow night. So then I went to the morning skate in the morning, and Daryl Sittler was the captain of the team. He was running the practice. There was no coach running the practice there. Jim Gregory was hanging around. And anyway, so the morning skate's over. I go home. And then I get a phone call from Roger at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, I can't do the deal with you tonight. I'm coming back as coach, but you can't tell anybody. And so I said, not to worry, I'll keep with the confidence here. But I said, we're advertising on the radio that you're going to be on the show tonight. So maybe I should meet up with you an hour and a half or so before the game and do a recorded interview where you can talk about some of the key points for the Maple Leafs to win the game and that type of thing. So he said, but he got back to me later. He said, well, meet me in Ballard's office. So anyway, I get there and go to the Ballard's office and record this interview. And then we go on, and our pregame show then was only about 10, 15 minutes long. So we had that interview run and then a couple of other things. And then they had the national anthem. And then that's when I announced Roger Nielsen is back as coach of the Maple Leafs. And the other story, and I got this more clarified when I met up with Daryl Sittler back in November when they had the night with for Lanny McDonald at the Saddle Dome that you hosted, Rob. Yep. And Daryl confirmed to me that he was he was badgering. Ballard wanted to put a paper bag over the head of Roger Nielsen, have him go out behind the bench just after the national anthem, and then stand there for a minute or so, and then remove the bag over his head. But Daryl finally convinced Ballard that wasn't a very good idea. So, I mean, that's just one of the stories. I mean, we could talk all afternoon about that. So,
well, the problem is
he was quite a guy, for sure.
The problem that people are listening to this right now going, oh, no, you're embellishing it. You're making it up. And you know, we think about everything that happens now and we go, oh, my God, this is unprecedented. It's never. Can you imagine, like, straight-faced had a conversation about asking a coach to put a paper bag on his head and go out on the bench? Straight-faced. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yep. No question.
Back to the local hockey heroes. Pete, Don Maloney takes over as president of hockey operations and interim general manager. His job is to do the assessment. Don's a capable. I don't think any of us have a problem with Don. He's he's been a GM. He's been a hockey man. He's, you know, soft spoken, but I think a very, very astute gentleman. What about things like exit interviews, Pete? How would those have been handled, or would Tree Living have been in on those? What did you hear about player exit interviews?
Yeah, from what I understand, the player interviews that they had last week on Friday, the interviews were conducted at the Saddle Dome individually with each player coming in one time each, and both Tree Living had already told the Flames at that point that he was not coming back. But he was going to be around and be part of the exit interviews because the announcement hadn't been made, blah, blah, blah. Sure. And Don Maloney was also in on those meetings. They were together, and they interviewed each player on an individual basis. Now, this thing, when players go in for these after-season exit interviews, they usually, with the management, they usually only last about 5, maybe 10 minutes. Now, from what I was told from a very good source, some of those lasted longer than an hour. And it took a whole lot longer to go through the entire process that day than it normally would. And from that, what happens when they have those meetings, in this case, Tree Living and Maloney would get together. They would talk to John Bean about the things that were discussed there. And then they would discuss with ownership of the Flames hockey team the input that they were getting from the players. Now, what input they were getting from the players, I've got no idea. But as I say, those meetings were a lot longer than they normally are. So then they go to the ownership, and then ownership from there, dissects what they want want to take from that and carry on from there. So I would guess that there were some very frank conversations with regard to Daryl Sutter and his coaching and that type of thing, as well as a whole bunch of other things I'm sure that were discussed at that. And from those exit meetings, the management, the ownership, then can formulate any decisions they want to make or don't want to make with regard to the hockey team. Now, with regard to Daryl Sutter, I have the opportunity of being around Daryl in that, in that run in 03, 04, and the year before that. And then for 5 years after that, when he was coach for one more year after that run, and then was general manager only. Now, to me, Daryl Sutter is a very, very astute hockey coach. Mm-hmm. He is a very, very insightful guy with regard to what's happening in the game, making a move to correct things. If he doesn't see them going right, can make them a lot quicker than a lot of coaches. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned it with you the last time we were on, but in that 04 run, Scotty Bowman was at game number 5 of that series that was in Tampa. And of course, Scotty Bowman is the greatest coach ever in the NHL. And just before game 5, I was talking with Scotty up in the broadcast booth there. And he was telling me, he said, your coach, and he was motioning Daryl, saying that he knows this game and can adjust quicker than any other coach in the NHL today. Yep. And, he said most coaches have to wait until the intermission to make changes and that sort of thing. But he detects them right away and make the proper adjustment. So with regard to Daryl, if you listen to what Daryl has to say with regard to his game planning and that sort of thing, you're going to have success. If you don't listen to him, you're not going to have success. And so, it seemed with watching Flames play this year, they weren't playing Daryl Sutter style hockey as often as they needed to. When you look back at last year when they had the 115 points and finished in first place in the division, they were playing Daryl Sutter style hockey. And that led to, success. Mm-hmm. They won a playoff series and had a series with Edmonton. They didn't win, but at least they were able to get by one round. So, right. But the other part of Daryl, he is a guy that's very, very demanding. Yep. And his commentary with the players is sometimes something that they might not like as players. But if you're being paid to be a player, and if you listen to him, you're going to have success. And you talk to players from that 04 Flame team. That might be a good idea for some media people and ourselves here, Rob, is to talk to some guys like Robin Regier and yep. people like that that were on that team. And, get their comments on Daryl Sutter. And I think you'll find they're going to have a lot of positive comments about the way he coaches the team. They may not have liked some of the things that were said, but they realized that was all part of gaining the success that the team had. So it certainly is going to be interesting to see what happens eventually with this Flame organization.
No, and you're right, Pete. And, it's kind of why I played that Rhett Warner clip at the beginning. Like, I think it's real easy to tag everything and say, well, it's, Daryl this and Daryl that. I am, and I think I've had this conversation. My question or my critique would come in just the way that I don't think Daryl believes it's his job to develop young players. I don't. And that's probably a holdover from past, but I think the game's changed, and I think he has a responsibility to develop players, young players at the NHL level. That's just the way the contracts work. That's just the way the game has changed. And the only other thing I would say, Pete, is he's blunt, like blunt.
Yeah.
And if you can't take blunt, then you can't be. He's been blunt to me. He's been blunt to you. That's just who he is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely who he is. But he also has a heart of gold, and I've seen that on many, many occasions. The most recent one was this year. It was soon after that infamous commentary he made on Pelche after he had played his game, and the media asked him how they thought he played, and then Daryl put his glasses on and took out the game sheet and then yelled out to the media, "What number was he?" And then he goes on to say, "Well, he no goals, no assists." -1 or 2, whatever it was, and 5 minutes or 6 minutes of ice time. Where it was not very complimentary of a young player having played his first NHL game. But right. It was about 3 days after that when they had family day, an afternoon game at the Saddle Dome, and prior to the game they had the son of Chris Snow his young son, Chris Snow, of course, the assistant general manager, who was dealing with a whole bunch of health issues. But he had his son, who's, I don't know how old he is, 9 or 10, or in that range, had him go in there and read the starting lineup for that game. I mean, and then there was Daryl right behind clapping and all this type of thing. I mean, that's the other side of him that a lot of people don't see, that he has a heart of gold, but it's something that's very rarely seen. We've seen him on both sides, Rob. We've seen the good. We've seen him, be very, very wild and crazy, and I'm saying not crazy, but saying a whole bunch of things that might not be out of line. It might be out of line to some people, but he has a heart of gold. When it comes to some other situations. I've also seen him at a whole bunch of charity events, and how much influence he has in a positive way in those events. So that's Daryl. And as I say, if you listen to him as a player, you'll have success.
So now Don Maloney goes forth with the general manager search. You were probably on the line when I made my case. How vast a search should this be?
Rob, I think this should be a very extensive search.
Okay.
I know you mentioned Craig Conroy, and I'm in agreement with what you were saying there about Craig, but I think that they should talk to at least a dozen people. And some within the organization, and a whole lot more outside the organization, and not so much the fact that that they're maybe thinking of hiring so-and-so that maybe was a general manager with another NHL team and is out of work today. But sit down with these guys, even though if you're not thinking about hiring them, sit down and meet with them and see what they have to say about your team. They may point out some things about your team that you weren't aware of or weren't considering that might be very, very important to the team going forward. There was a very smart general manager once told me, when you're interviewing for a new coach, in this particular case, talk to as many coaches as you can. So, and that's the very reason. You may have the idea in the back of your mind who you want, but talk to these other people to see what their thoughts are about your team, because sometimes that can prove to be very, very helpful. So I think they should do a very, very extensive search, and obviously Craig should be the guy that they talk to, and give him ample opportunity to show what he can do. The other interesting aspect of that, like you and I, we've known Craig for a long, long time. His time as a player when he came here on a couple of occasions, then being involved in management for as long as he has been. He's a very, very hardworking, diligent guy. He's a very upfront guy. He's not shy to talk in front of microphones and talk to people. And he's also well organized and that sort of thing. But to know what his contributions have been so far to the Flame organization in his role as assistant general manager that he's had now for all these years, the only real people that know, because it's a behind-the-scenes job for the most part, the only people that know how his abilities are in that range would be John Bean and Don Maloney and others that have been, active watching what he has been doing. Because when there's trades are made, the general manager is the guy that's always in the forefront. When the draft is on, it's the general manager always in the forefront. When there's a player signing, it's the general manager always in the forefront. You don't see how much work the assistant guy has done behind the scenes and how difficult it may have been for him to haul off this, that, and the other thing. So to me, that's the key aspect with regard to Craig. He definitely, I would be in favor of him being the general manager, but I think those people have a better insight as to his hockey knowledge, his hockey workmanship, and all that type of thing. And I'm sure they have their opinions on that right now. They may have already decided in their own mind he's the guy. Right. But in the same sense, they should interview a whole bunch of different people. I remember when Bill Peters became coach of the Flames, and Brad Treliving made the comment afterwards at the hiring that he didn't interview anybody else for the job. I remember when I heard that, I said, he shouldn't have done that. He should have talked to some more people, even if Bill Peters was the guy he was going to hire. As it turned out, Bill Peters wasn't a very good hire to start with, and he had to leave unceremoniously after a little over a year under the coaching tag. So, to me, that's really important to get as much insight as you can from other people that are in the hockey business about your own team, and that's how you can do it.
Pete, does the coach have any role in this? Not necessarily interviewing or anything like that, but Daryl's got 2 years remaining. My guess is that ownership would like him to stay. When you have a coach, when you're inheriting a coach like that, what's the procedure? What's the role when you're trying to find a general manager?
Okay, before that goes on, Rob, you have to know the general manager has to be in agreement with who the coach is.
Okay.
If the general manager is not in agreement with who the coaches is, it's not going to work. I mean, coaches and general managers, they have to be on the same wavelength. Yes, they can differ in situations. I mean, when you look at it, the general manager's job is about the team today. But he's also going to be looking to the future because it's an ongoing thing with a hockey team. In the coach's range, he's worried about the team today. And so at times there are disagreements between both sides, but they have to be amicable, getting away from that to going about the job of making the team a whole lot better. So the way things work, the president should hire the ownership and president. They hire the general manager. The general manager then usually hires the coach. So in this particular case, if Daryl is going to be staying as coach of the team, and he has the 2 years remaining on his contract, whoever they hire through the interview process, they have to make it very clear Daryl's going to be the coach. And what are your thoughts on Daryl? Can you work with Daryl? Can you do this with Daryl? And then, of course, once you've made your decision, maybe you get down to 2 or 3 people. Maybe you can go to Daryl and say, we've got this guy, this guy, this guy that we're considering for the job. Do you have any comment? And not that he makes the final decision, but he can give you a hint on, whether or not think the 2 people, the GM and the coach can get together on a good natured basis and make the team better. So, I mean, those are all things that they really have to consider, when they're getting this hiring done, because it's a very important hire. The team, the fans right now are all up in disarray. They're not happy with the team. And so they have to do the right thing, get the right people here and get this team back on track.
I agree with you, Pete.
And you also have to wonder, we talk about the exit meetings. They had the exit meetings with management, and then of course when they had the exit meetings with media after the players come in and have their the final say with the owner management, then a lot of them meet with the media, or most of them, I guess, met with the media. And it seemed from the comments that were being made by Michael Backlund and Elias Lindholm that then their contracts run out after next season, not the one that's upcoming. After that, their contracts are up. And they seem to indicate they're not staying here. And if that's the case, then they've got to look into that as a very serious nature and get something in return for them, or get whatever situation that they have as a problem straightened out, because those are your top 2 centers on the team. I mean, Kadri could be your top 2 center as well. I thought he had a great first half of the season, then kind of tailed off at the second. So, but those are all things that have to be considered here as they move forward with this situation. And it was very surprising to have those guys make those kind of comments at their closing sessions with media. They probably said that to the management as well when they met with Tree Living and Maloney. But normally they don't say that in public. Normally, I remember a former trainer with the Flames saying to me one time, what the players are saying sometimes to the media is just what they're supposed to be saying, not necessarily what they really mean. And so, but those guys were pretty frank, basically, about what their thoughts were on going forward with this team. So, if they're not going to be back, then they've got to move them here in the summer so they get something back for them, rather than get themselves in a situation like they had with Johnny Gaudreau last summer.
Well, Pete, you're right. You and I have done this a lot. We've been to a lot of green garbage bag days. I'm not sure if I was more surprised by the comments of Lindholm and Backlund, or more surprised by Weegar going after the building, because traditionally Flames players do not talk about that. It's not that they don't think that. I don't want anybody to think that it's all rosy, but that's one area that they've generally avoided.
Yes, right? Definitely. I think, he made some very nice, very interesting comments, and very, to me, important comments with the way things are going with regard to that arena situation.
Agreed. Let's leave. It feels like it was a month ago, but it was really 1 week ago, the final game of the year. Pete, I always like to lean on you because I think we get excited and caught up, but you have the right kind of temperament on things. Game 82, you're out of the playoffs. Dustin Wolf gets in, Matt Coronado gets in. I know there wasn't a lot to be happy about, but there seemed to be a lot of excitement about these 2 young guys. Exactly how excited should we be in a game 82 against a team like San Jose?
Rob, if it weren't for those 2 guys, I wouldn't have watched that game. But now to put
okay, fair enough.
But to put that in perspective, I go back to a comment a coach made to me a number of years ago. He said, never fall in love with a hockey player, a young hockey player that's playing in a game at the end of the regular season that means nothing, or is playing in a preseason game in September. Because you fall in love with a player then, he might break your heart in October.
Right.
His whole point was that these games don't mean a whole lot. If they stand out, it's great. It's great, but it's not something to get overly excited about. If they don't stand out in the game, then you're getting a little bit of a read that these guys need more work. But you can't really tell from that one instance or one game that these guys are ready to come in and be top players in the NHL. Now, I thought both Wolf and Donato played really strong games. I mean, they had lots of energy. Wolf made some really great saves to get the victory. And Donato made a number of great plays. He was always in the mix and that type of thing. But to me, I don't get excited about those guys now. If they can come back, do that through training camp and the exhibition games that we're talking about, and if they do that, then I'm sure they'll be in the lineup at some point. But then is when you really can tell whether or not these guys are ready for the NHL and come up and be guys that are going to be star players for your team. But it was a good positive start. Both of those guys get in their first look at NHL play. And so we'll see now where it goes when training camp comes. I think we're going to have a younger Flame team next year than the one we had this past season. And having said that, that means that, you've got those two guys and maybe Pelche and maybe a couple of other younger guys making their way into the lineup for this team.
Well, give us a little historical context here, Peter. As we're doing this, our outstanding producer, Gavin, just piped in. So not surprising that that Wolf was named AHL Goalie of the Year for the second consecutive year. But this is just his second year in the AHL. Pete, this is now 4 straight years that Dustin Wolf has been the goalie of the year in his league. Twice in the Western League in 1920, and now the last 2 in the American Hockey League. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible what this young man has done.
No question about that. I remember watching, I'm sorry, I wasn't watching. I remember hearing about when he was drafted by the Flames, the second day of the draft, was it round 7, was it? Or
he was the 4th to final pick, Pete. There was only 3 guys picked after him.
And I think he was the only guy left in the building, a player that was left in the building at that particular point in time there with his parents. Can you imagine? He was sitting there through all of the draft procedures one day and then the second day, not having his name called, and then suddenly having his name called. And, I remember hearing about that and showing when they showed it on TV afterwards. I got a chance to see the highlights of it. I'm thinking, boy, that's incredible for this guy. So, and then at that time, they talked about how great he had played in the Western Hockey League. Then he went on for another great year there, and then 2 great years now in the American League. And he's got the American League playoffs coming up here, in which he's going to be a key factor in whether or not the Wranglers can have themselves a great playoff run here to get the city a little bit excited about playoff hockey here. But yeah, he's just phenomenal what this kid has accomplished. Now, the only knock that you hear about him is that he's too small. But he certainly was able to cover all the angles in the game that he played, that last game of the regular season last week. So, and as you say, he's been able to show that right through the American League. Now, stopping puck regular in the NHL is a bit different than the AHL, but he's certainly on the right course. And you have to think that he's going to get an opportunity to show what he can do at the NHL level next year. Now, having that being said, you've got 2 goalies under contract that are here for next year. And so what are you going to do with that? Now, Markstrom, I don't think he's movable.
I don't either.
Not with his contract that he has, the term that's left on it, and the fact he's coming off such a bad year. He needs to definitely bounce back. Now, the other guy, he may be able to make a small trade to get him to another team. You're not going to get a whole big return back, but to make room for Wolf, that may be something they'll do during the offseason.
Well, we've got Brent Cron coming up next, and
he's the guy to talk about goals.
Well, that's exactly it, right? We're going to have him on, and I just want to point out too that Mitch Love, the head coach of the Wranglers, back-to-back Coach of the Year. So there's stuff happening there. Like the young defenseman Jeremy Poirier is made the all-rookie team. Connor Zeri's had a really quiet season. Like there's there's Walker doers out of that program. Like there's some reasons to be optimistic. You know, in a way, Brad Treliving's left you in a really good place. Two more for you, Pete. One has to do with the Wranglers. Safe to say, I think, you know, after all of those years of almost nobody watching them in Stockton, nobody caring in Stockton, and some of the really, I don't know, bad dates they got this year. There were some midweeks that didn't draw well. I think I think this team's going to get a lot of fan support. I think the Dome's going to be humming to watch this Wrangler team in the postseason.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rob. It's unfortunate that their crowds weren't, you know, really, really great during the regular season. But as you mentioned, selection of dates is a key element. And when you've got the Flames playing in there, they're going to get all the prime dates. That's normal. And then you have the Hitmen that have been there for years. And, you know, they also have the Roughnecks that play in there. So it's tough getting dates that are going to be prime to get big crowds in there. And, of course, you're the American League team, you're the farm team. So that, you know, that has its significance as well. But now that the Flame season is over, the Hitman season is over, and the Wranglers are there and in a playoff spot where they're very much a favorite to have themselves a run into the playoffs. I'm like you. I think this is going to generate a whole lot of playoff excitement. Whether or not they can get 18 or 19,000 people in that building, I don't know about that, but they certainly should be able to, you know, get up about 9, 10, or 12,000 people to watch this team, especially if they get a whole bunch of wins going and, you know, win a series and it continues on from that. I don't think it'll get to be the Sea of Red, like the excitement in the city that we would have if the Flames are getting into 1 or 3 or 4 rounds. But I think it's going to be something that's going to generate hockey people here and create a fever for the Wranglers.
But if I remember correctly, Pete, a couple of those long runs by the Hitmen, towards the end of them, the crowds were really big, right? And they were great.
They were, yeah, definitely. Yep.
Right, yeah. 19 years ago today, remember where you were?
19 years ago today. Rob, usually I know where I was on significant days, but I have to refresh my memory.
Well, hold on. I'm worried I might be wrong on this then. Is today not the 19th anniversary of Game 7 in Vancouver?
Oh, might very well be. Yes, that could very well be the night that the Flames won Game 7, a series that they weren't supposed to win. Yeah, now that you mention it. And thinking here, that was an interesting game.
Walk me through the last minute, Pete. What can you remember about that last minute?
Well, it was Ginla getting the penalty, and then the hacks all go, or the fans, the hacks, everything going, a bunch of stuff going on, and then Martin Chellenham moving in and getting a goal to tie it, the Flames getting the goal from Ginla to tie it, and then going into overtime and winning it on the goal by Martin Chellenham that started a string of him getting the game-winning or series-winning goal in 4 straight series, although they didn't count the last one. But yeah, that was a real interesting night that night. It looked like it was not going to be a success for a bit there and going into that closing part. And all of a sudden, it turned around to the chagrin of the fans there in Vancouver.
It was Matt Cook Matt Cook tied it, right, for the Canucks.
Yeah.
And if I remember, it was Ginla going down the ice, and a sweatshirt got tossed. He had the empty net, and then he was coming back, and there was a stick, and he tripped over that. And then Vancouver ties it with 6 seconds, and Jovanovski's in the bench, and he's going ballistic. And then they go to overtime. And I remember being at Shanks South with Roger Millions was our analyst, and it just felt like, oh my God, all the air had left. Vancouver, it's inevitable now. The Canucks will win. And on that same Jovanovski power play or penalty, that power play for the Flames, that series, Pete, that series taught me so much about hockey. I remember when Johan Hedberg got in, he played for Vancouver, and he could handle the puck, Pete. He was going to change the whole complexion of the series because he could handle the puck. Right?
Yep, exactly. Yep. Now that's bringing back the memory. That was a real memorable night.
Yeah, it was fun. Not as much fun as the next series. I've never asked you this, Pete, but now with a little distance, could we enjoy one series more than the next, or do you have to kind of enjoy the 7 games against Tampa because that was the Stanley Cup final? Because that Detroit series, I mean, Calgary winning it in 6, the way they won it, Dave Lowry coming back, Mika Kiprasov, like that in many ways was one of if you're watching a team, that was maybe the best I've ever seen result-wise and play-wise for the Calgary Flames.
Yeah, Rob, going into that playoff series, nobody gave the Flames a chance to win. I mean, I don't think many gave them a chance to win against Vancouver either, but against Detroit, I mean, that Detroit team was a powerful team. I forgot how many points they had during the regular season, but they actually dominated the entire league. They had all kinds of future Hall of Famers in their lineup, and they were supposed to win that series easily against the Flame team that got into the playoffs with 2 days left on the regular schedule. But the Flames battled their way hard, went into Detroit, won games there, came back, and then won that Game 6 in the Saddle Dome. And the thing I remember from that is that when Marty Jolinet scored the goal to win the 6-game in overtime to clinch the series, I yelled out 3 "Yeah babies" to celebrate the occasion. And then I remember coming down after the game, going down to the Flame dressing room, doing an interview with Marty, and I think you were in the studio, and replayed my broadcast of that goal. And at that time, when I heard the 3 "Yeah babies," I said, "Oh no, that's terrible."
And he did, folks.
I think I said that live on the air.
You absolutely did. Absolutely, you said that. Absolutely. Are you going to tell the rest of the story?
Yeah. And then I went home after that. I couldn't sleep. And I get up the next morning, and the first thing I did was go down to the Saddle Dome. And I went to Daryl Sutter's office, knocked on the door. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And so I went in, sat down, and I said, "Look, I want to apologize for being so excited when Marty scored that goal last night to clinch the series. They're yelling out 3 "Yeah babies." One "Yeah baby" would have been sufficient. Winning the second round of the playoff series is not enough for 3 "Yeah babies." And so he's looking at me and gave me a dirty look. And I thought maybe he's going to start yelling at me. And then all of a sudden he got a smile on his face and he said, "Yeah, I heard it on the radio this morning. That was awesome." So that made me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, but you've also told the story, Pete, that in many ways that was a release valve for 7 years, and all of the Save the Flames campaign and all of that. Like it just, the Vancouver series was great, but it was a juggernaut. It was Shanahan and Yzerman and Lindstrom and Brett Hull and Hatcher and 2 guys that I don't know if we ever heard of. Datsuk and Zetterberg are on that team, and their best was ahead of them. That should have been over in 4. And there's a story about Daryl too, right? Because wasn't there a whole bunch of headlines of sweep and things like that, and Daryl kind of used that as motivation too.
Yes, he did. Because he got all of those clippings from somehow media people or the PR people got a hold of all of those, and he had them plastered on the wall, telling his team, they're telling us we have no chance in this series, or basically saying to the guys, "Let's go out and show them different." And so, but that was all part of the motivation that was used in the dressing room by Coach Daryl Sutter to have that team go on and upset the Red Wings in that series, and a dramatic upset. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
And lots of stories from 04, Pete, and I promise I'll end it here. But Commodore, the double doors, Montador, all of those things. But to me, it always come down to Pie that Dave Lowry was coaching and was secretly working, and then came back in that series and was such a heart and soul guy. And I just remember, nobody epitomized what the Calgary Flames were that year more than Dave Lowry.
That's right. Absolutely. No question about that. That was quite a story for him to be behind the bench 1 minute, and the next thing you know, he's out there in an important game, playing a very key role in the team, picking up a victory. But, you mentioned Steve Montador there, and that brings me back to something I'm very thankful for him, the late Steve Montador. In the next series, the Western Conference Final against San Jose, game number 1 of that series was in San Jose. And so I was fighting a cold going into that game. And so the game went through 3 periods. It was tied. It went to overtime. And the overtime period lasted almost 19 minutes or 18 minutes or whatever it was. And so I'm broadcasting. I can barely get the words out of my mouth because the cold is having that big an effect on my vocal cords. And Mike Rogers, who was the color commentator, he knew what was going on. So every time I'd stop, he'd jump in and say something. And then, of course, finally, Steve Monador scored the goal to give the Flames the win. And I got a shot of adrenaline, I guess, and made the yell that Flames won the game and had a 1-0 lead in the series. Got all excited with that. So, but that's not the key. That's important, because if he hadn't scored that goal and they had to go to another overtime, I might not have been able to talk if it had gone to another overtime period. And then after that, I go downstairs to the Flame dressing room to do the post-game interview as normal. And, of course, Steve Monador is the guy I want to talk to. So by the time I got downstairs, then I could barely get a word out of my mouth, because, my vocal cords had tightened up because I hadn't used them for 10 minutes. So Monador comes out, and right away he realizes I've got a problem. And I remember introducing him on there, and right away he took the microphone and he talked for 5 straight minutes about the goal, the game, and all the other stuff that was going on with the team. And I'm so ever thankful for Steve Monador, first for ending that game and then handling that interview the way that he did, because it saved me from some embarrassing moments. And again, we certainly miss him, because he was a real character kind of guy.
He was the best. And I talk about the fact that I was doing those games on the radio from Shanks, and I'll never forget the beaver tail, because you could hear it over the crowd. It was so loud. It was so loud. Ginla has the puck, and here's this 8th, 9th defenseman coming up the ice, banging it. Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me. And Monty scored. Pete, what's your secret when you have a sore throat? What do you do that helps you when you have a sore throat?
Oh, yes. Well, when I have that situation of whether it's a cold or a sore throat, I take a couple of sips of vinegar. And usually what I do, about 5 minutes before the start of the game, I would take that. And then I would take it again at the end of the second period. Now, I would always, the key with that is that it doesn't solve anything with regard to curing having a cold or having a sore throat. But what it does, it clears away the mucus that are in there that allows you to talk. Yeah. And so whenever I have that situation, I use that. And where I got that tip was one year, Anne Murray, the famous Canadian singer, was performing here in Calgary. And I got the opportunity to meet her at the Westin Hotel here in Calgary. She was performing, I believe, at one of the auditoriums here in the city that night. And somehow, I don't know how it happened, but anyway, the people knew that I liked Anne Murray because she was a Maritimer.
I was just going to say, there's the Maritime, yes.
So we get in there, and so in the 10-minute conversation I had with her, at one point I asked her, "What do you do when you have to perform and you have a cold or you have a sore throat or whatever?" And that's when she told me about the vinegar. And so ever since then, I've been doing that in that type of situation, although I haven't had any for a while. But I do pass that on. I passed it on to you. I passed it on to several other people. And
I couldn't do it. I tried it, Pete. I couldn't do it because you took, 4 or 5 sips, right?
Yeah, 4 or 5 sips. I mean, it tastes terrible. And it stays on you for a few minutes after you do it. But hey, you got to get the job done. So.
I remember I could not, and you probably remember, I asked you one time, so I gargle this. No, you sip it. No, I gargle it. Nope, you sip it. And I looked at you dumbfounded, and I've tried it. And folks, if you want to have a little fun, try taking 4 or 5 sips of vinegar. And then you would do that 3 times, right? First, and second?
Yeah, well, sometimes I would wait until the end of sometimes I wouldn't do it at the first intermission. Sometimes I'd just wait to the second, depending on how it was reacting at that point. So, another interesting, I passed that along to the Hitmen were in the playoffs one year, and I was down there one morning or wherever, and the play-by-play, I forget who the guy was, from Saskatoon. Red-headed guy.
Yeah, I know exactly. Les Lazarick.
Yes, Les Lazarick. He had a cold. And so I'm mentioning to him, take some vinegar. And so I went through the process of how we should do it and that type of thing. So anyway, I'm at the game that night. So I happened to go up into the broadcast area there. And in the second period, I think it was, I go in there and I just happened to go by where his booth was. And he has, those little vinegar packets that you can get. He had a whole bunch of those that were already open that he'd already taken. one of them would have been, half of one of them would have been enough.
Oh, less.
So, but he was able to, he finished the period. I was talking to him, don't take too much of that stuff. But he got through the game. So when I saw all those packets that were on just beside him on his table there, I said, gosh, he shouldn't have taken that many. But anyway, but that's what happened there. So,
well, here's my attempt at Ron McLeanism. We started with Harold Ballard. We end with vinegar, sweet to sour. That's how this one goes. Pete, I really appreciate this. We've had unbelievable response. We got lots and lots of live viewers right now, and all I saw were, I love Pete, I love ya, baby, and they love you. They want to hear more of you. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks, and hopefully by then, maybe we'll have a little Flames news. But we didn't even get into the playoffs. They've started. We didn't even get into that. Right?
You never know where we'll be in 2 weeks, Rob.
You never
but we
know.
Look forward to having a chat. What the subjects will be, we'll leave that to others to plant them for us.
Here's the one projection. At some point, you will reference a Maritimer. At some point in the conversation, a Maritimer will be referenced.
Always have to get that in there, Rob.
You have to. Love you, bud. Thanks for
never forget where you're from.
Nope. We'll talk soon. Thanks, Peter.
All right.
Oh, Peter Maher, everybody.